This morning I want to talk a bit about persecution, advocating for persecuted Christians around the world. And I want to do it in three ways. I want to talk a bit about the trends. I want to talk about some of the hot spots around the world. And I want to talk about some issues and or tactics, ways that we need to approach this. It's all going to be rather general. And my hope is that then as we get into the questions and answers, if you have something, a region of the world that you're interested in, a particular case, that you will just raise your hand and let me know, and we'll go from there. I think to begin with, though, I'd like to share with you a picture of what motivates me as a person who is a follower of Jesus and sees what's going on, all the injustice in the world, all of the issues that you could be animated by. What motivates me as an individual? And it has to do with individual stories. The people that you run into, that their lives are greatly impacted. They're attacked or hurt or in some way harmed for no other reason, not because they're bad citizens, not because they've done something wrong according to civil society, but because they are a follower of Jesus. And every year we release at Open Doors a World Watch List, which is our ranking of persecution around the world. I'll talk a bit about that later and how we compile that. But this year, when we were in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club releasing the study, I dedicated the study to a woman who's 72 years of age, who had worked in rural India for years and years and years in a health clinic. She felt called, much like Mother Teresa, to go and to serve people, connect with them on a personal basis, and did so for a long period of time. But 4 years ago in India, Prime Minister Modi was elected. He's part of a BJP, the initials BJP party in India, which has a radical Hindu agenda and has had a radical Hindu agenda in India since it started in the early 20s. But they never had power before. 4 years ago, President Modi comes into power and he set a tone where it was okay to persecute Christians and to persecute religious minorities. One of the themes of the BJP party is that essentially you are not a true Indian citizen unless you are Hindu, practicing Hindu. And they want to eliminate Christianity within the next few years. And this isn't an underground policy. This isn't something they sort of whisper about. No, this is a stated policy. I saw it on their version of CNN. They discuss it. President Modi's main advisors talk about it publicly. Despite all of the pluralism within India, the different ways that people use the language, I mean, there's multiple cultures within such a large country, but they want one religion, Hinduism. And that culture that's been cultivated over the last 4 years has seen a rise in persecution against nuns like this 72-year-old woman that I referred to, that I dedicated our World Watch List study and presentation to. She worked in this rural area, and she dedicated her life to giving them medical care. Some radical Hindus in the area began to write her notes, nasty notes, saying, "You need to stop what you're doing. Get out of there. This is a Hindu country. We don't want you to do anything in Jesus' name. Even if you're not preaching, if you're not proselytizing, you are coming under the heading of the Church of Jesus and the Catholic Church, and we don't want anything to do with you." So they began to threaten her, and she stood strong. She didn't back down. And sure enough, they followed through on their threats. 2 years ago, they came in and they attacked her. They brutalized her. They tied her to the bed. They raped her. I mean, it's a very difficult scene. The only way that they found her was that she failed to show up for prayers the next morning when they found her tied to the bed, just dehydrated and in pain. I tell you that so you understand the gravity of what this woman went through. This woman who dedicated her life and her purity to God. There she is. Well, they arrested the perpetrators, but even as the police came in, They coming from an extremist Hindu background, began to eliminate evidence. They burned a lot of the clothing. They did all manner of stuff that was wrong from beginning to end. Why? Because of the culture and that was set from, I believe, from the top. And when the trial came to be this year of these two folks, they were let off. No justice for this nun. People like that, when I hear their stories, it motivates me. And because I'm not a lawyer, and I know some of you all are, or maybe hope to be, I really am hoping that these kinds of stories, real life people and how they're affected, will motivate you as I go through some of what's going on around the world to take an interest and go deep, because it's my sense, and if there's any theme to what I'm saying today, it's this, that religious freedom is the next big battleground for the Christian faith. It's what we're all going to be talking about in this next generation. Now, that's not true today. I realize that. I realize that there's a handful of people here today because the wider body of Christ thinks of persecution of Christians or religious freedom issues as a side issue. It's an incident. It's something that happens with ISIS. It's something that happens with certain dictators or certain political systems. But it's not a big problem overall. But it is a growing, significant problem. And I think that this is something every believer, everybody who has to count the cost and become a follower of Jesus, is going to be engrossed in the next generation. I don't know if you all believe that, but I hope I can somehow convince you that this is not a side issue, but that this is what it's all about. And if you do, then I hope you'll consider how this would affect your calling, how you live your life and your profession, and be part of starting this movement. It has to be a movement that's got to get started. It takes a bit of force to get something rolling. But once we do, I think we're going to see more people talking about this, more issues coming to the forefront, not just through Fox News or some of the other news sources, but that we ourselves are talking about it. I think that's critically important, because I sense right now any big story that happens around persecution is driven by Fox News or some other secular media source. I think the day will come when we can't count on secular media sources to defend us, because we will be seen as intolerant. That already happens, and be part of the problem. And we're going to have amongst our own culture a sense that this is important, that we support persecuted believers and are motivated by this. Okay? So let me talk a bit about some of the trends. As I do, I want to talk about how we got into this. Open Doors was started some 62 years ago by a man named Brother Andrew. Some of you may have read his book, God's Smuggler, which is the story of this Dutch man. I'm going to hang out with him in a few days. I'm going to go to his house. He's 90 years old. And I will sit in the home he's lived in since he wrote God's Smuggler. And his story is just one guy who was going to a Bible college in Scotland, and every time he heard somebody talk about what was going on in the world, they would talk about the world, but as Andrew would say to me, they were really only talking about half the world. They were talking about the free world. They were talking about Europe and where he could move around freely. But he was always wondering about, what about the other half of the world, the half that was dark at that time? It was the Soviet Union. So he told his professor, he said, look, or one of the folks at the school, he said, I want to go to the other half of the world, and I want to go into the Soviet Union and take some Bibles in there. And he had gone to the Communist Youth Day in Yugoslavia, and I have a picture of, pardon me, it might have been in Poland, but I have a picture of this giant crowd on Communist Youth Day, and Andrew is in and amongst that. And he went as a member of the Communist Party. Now, he wasn't a communist, but he got them to let him in. And he took his Bible with him. And he talked to people about Jesus. That was his first moment. And then he began to want to take Bibles in to the Soviet Union. And so he got a little VW bug. That's a little symbol that we have around our offices. And he would just fill it with Bibles and drive it across the border and deliver these Bibles to Russian Orthodox folks or anybody who wanted to have a scripture. That's how Open Doors got started. And we smuggled millions and millions of Bibles into the Soviet Union. But eventually we decided that as the Soviet Union was morphing and changing and eventually collapsed, we began to have the need to say, what else is going on around the world? Where else are people persecuted for their faith? And China was on Andrew's heart. Vietnam was on Andrew's heart. And eventually what came out of that is that we have a system for determining where we're going to do work. The key one is, what is God leading us to do? But secondly, where are the most people persecuted for their faith? Where is the most difficult conditions that people are persecuted for their faith? There are about 5 or 6 criteria that we look at. And when we got into figuring out a healthy way to determine how we were going to spend our resources, out of that grew this research that's called the World Watch List. So for years and years we did research and we just kept it internally. We knew that conditions were more difficult over here, but there were more believers over here, so we could have a slightly bigger impact. And we were doing that sort of thing, and then we just decided to release it and go deep. And now we have researchers all over the world, and we are working in right around 70. We measure about 75 countries that we are monitoring regularly. And we this year we'll do some top-line research in the United States and in Europe and other places. But by and large, we focus our practical work in the top 50 countries on the World Watch List. And when you look at the World Watch List and see North Korea at the top and some of these other countries, that's where we would spend the most of our resources, at the top of the list. And where we're really trying to make the most difference, okay? So when I talk about trends, it comes from this research that is not just in my short time frame here at Open Doors, but is over the long haul, 60 plus years of what's been going on and how countries open and close and things change. For a long time, China was our massive effort. It was our main focus. Then China, for a long time now, for a handful of years anyway, has ceased to be a significant issue for us. We work in the northwest part of China where the Muslim populations, the Uyghur. We work down in Tibet, and then we work, I think it's okay to tell you all this, we work down into North Korea from along some of the border areas. So we've not seen China, it's way down on our World Watch List, as a significant issue because the nature of the church has changed there. It's a large, strong church. We don't want to infantize it or make it seem smaller than it is. It's big, it's strong, it's much like the American church, wide and shallow, and yet we want to, oh, I'm sorry. I was hoping you weren't going to catch that. But we want that church to get their own Bibles. Well, now this week, of course, some of you will have heard that since March that they've shut off, the Chinese government has shut off the flow of Bibles that you can buy online. You have to go through the 3 Self-Church, which is the official church. They're ramping up arrests of unregistered pastors. They're only holding them for a week or so, but things are changing in China. That's what some of our research has shown us. But let me dive in here a little bit, talk about 4 trends that I see that are significant in the research, and then we'll get into some hot spots and issues. The first trend is that rogue regimes are going to continue to be a significant driver of persecution of believers. And rogue regimes, I mean North Korea, Sudan, Eritrea in Africa, which is a very virulent form of Islamic extremism. There are regularly rogue regimes on the World Watch List. These are just countries that apparently international pressure means nothing to them. International opinion doesn't seem to rattle them. So we have to continue to deal with that. When you hear about a country like North Korea, what is it like for a believer in North Korea? Well, North Korea has a system that is very reminiscent of communist Soviet Union when we began. Neighborhood watches where people are paid or given extra benefits if they will monitor the comings and goings within the neighborhood. Imagine that. Some of you have nosy neighbors. This takes it to a whole new level. So there are neighborhood watches. And Christians, in the ranking of enemies of the state within North Korea, Christians are at the top. They're the fifth level, the most difficult hated group in North Korea, as an enemy of the state, at least. And so you have these neighborhood watches, and people and individuals will be rewarded, usually with more food, sometimes with more money, if they will find somebody who has a Bible, who's talking a Bible, or suspected of having people meeting together to talk about Jesus. And then you will go to a labor camp. Their labor camps, if you're arrested, their labor camps are 3 generation often. When the country became set as it is now in the mid-40s, you had a regime led by Kim Jong-un's grandfather. He's the current leader now, but his grandfather decided, if we're going to get rid of Christianity, because Christianity had a strong presence in what is now North Korea for many years, if we're going to get rid of this, we're going to have to make sure that we touch all 3 generations as a philosophy to make sure that we wipe this out. So they arrest the believer and they put him in jail, and then they'll have, if they have kids, those kids go. And if those folks grow up in the labor camp and have children, then they will stay in labor camp. 3 generations of camps that are in the camps. Sometimes, if people are part of that 3rd generation and they don't have a personal faith but are still classified as a Christian, they will be moved out to some rural Siberia version of North Korea and not held in a labor camp, but they'll have the last access to food and resources, and are usually the first to starve. So this 3 generation thing is very real in North Korea. And these neighborhood watches and these kinds of things are very real. We had a woman who was a dear part of our ministry who had just come to know Jesus when she tried to escape North Korea and found her way into a home where she accepted Jesus. And when she came to know the Lord in a personal way, she felt so powerfully that she wanted her family back in North Korea to know that she took a Bible and she smuggled herself back into North Korea. That in and of itself is shocking, is it not? It happens fairly regularly. That people who come to know Jesus after they've escaped want to go back, and she did. We call her Esther. That's one of the common names that we give people who we have to give a code name to. Brother Andrew, by the way, his name isn't Andrew. Well, we started early on giving people code names to help them get in and out of these countries. So his name is Anne Vandervey, I think is how you would pronounce it. I don't speak good Dutch, but at any rate, he said it's just as well that they call me Andrew because my name sounds like I'm a woman. So let's just keep it at Brother Andrew. It sounds cool. But Esther, when she took her Bible back into North Korea, she began to pray and to share and so forth, and she led people to the Lord. But she made the mistake of telling her daughter, and I say mistake. A lot of times believers in North Korea don't tell their children that they're followers of Jesus. It's one of the hard things to grasp. One of the things that we have the benefit of having here is a very idealistic sort of a worldview because we're so comfortable. But a lot of believers in North Korea do not share their faith openly with their children for this reason. Esther shared the Bible with her daughter, and her daughter, in her innocence, went to school, and the teacher said, "Hey, if any of you have a mom or a dad who have a Bible, would you please let us know, and we will give you an extra chicken." And so she's like, "My mom has a Bible? Well, where does she keep it?" It's hidden in the wall. "Okay, great, here's the chicken," and so forth. Not knowing that she would never see her mother again. Okay, that's North Korea. And Esther went to prison. She died in prison, but not before she led many, many people to the Lord there. So our work in North Korea is very covert, and we don't go into too much detail about how we do it, but we can tell you this, There's probably around 500,000 followers of Jesus in North Korea. You won't read that on the State Department websites or anything. But we know there's a strong network, underground network of believers, about 500,000, of which more than 60,000, as many as 80,000 are in labor camps. So they're a good portion of the Jesus following there is in labor camps. And so we got to keep them in prayer. But North Korea is not the only rogue regime. Eritrea, Sudan, lots of problems. That's one of the trends that you're going to continue to see whenever you see a rogue regime. They seem to be threatened by the principles of Christianity, the teachings of, and principles of Jesus, largely because of the equality issues, but also because they want to be worshipped and they want to have everybody give obeisance to them. So this is going to be continue to be a trend, and it's a trend in today's on today's list. The second trend is nationalism. This is one that's come up in the 5 years that I've been tracking this carefully. Nationalism wasn't the factor that it is today. When I say nationalism, I mean it's built around the idea that I discussed that India is dealing with. India has a nationalism problem. They want you to fully be Indian, and for you to fully be Indian, you can't have outside imperialist influences of the United States or the West, and religion is a part of that. So to be Indian means to be Hindu. And Nepal has picked that up. And persecution is rising in Nepal as well. Persecution is rising dramatically in India. India is now number 11 on our world watch list. India. When you think of India, you think Gandhi, nice people, technology, business partnerships, all of those things are true. But this government, there's hundreds and hundreds of attacks since the first of the year. I mean, hundreds of attacks. Last year, some of you who are lawyers will find this interesting. There were 635 believers held without trial in prison for their faith in India. So there's a lot of issues going on in India, but India is not the only one that has a nationalism problem. Russia, Bhutan, a lot of these countries, they want China, they want Christians, if they exist in China. China would like to see them be Christians. You can be a Christian so long as your Christianity is Chinese based, that you show obeisance to the government, that the church itself doesn't question the government, much the way Russia has passed laws in the last year or two that is favoring the Orthodox Church, because they will sign off on key points of legislation that the Russian government is pushing, and of course they're pressuring independent evangelical movements, and we see this as a significant problem. The teachings of Jesus, if you look at it and take it all the way back, Jesus came and lived and taught, and the teachings that he have gave rise to Christianity. And Christianity now is trying to be co-opted by governments around the world, by China, by Russia, and other places. It's a significant problem, because we got to get back to this being a spiritual movement based on the life and the teaching of Jesus. And we want to preserve that for people, that it doesn't become politicized. It's a trend you need to watch, looking in India, looking at China, Russia, Bhutan, Nepal, other areas. So third trend, women. We see that the increased pressure on Christian women is a trend that we cannot ignore. Women are doubly persecuted if they are Christian women, because they are seen as less than in many of the countries on our world watch list, in the Middle Eastern countries and other countries. And then if you are a Christian woman, you're persecuted even more. Let me give you an example. There's a young girl named Habiba, who was 14 years of age, living in the northern part of Nigeria, which is a Sharia law state. And as she was walking to school, one of these soldiers of Sharia law came and kidnapped her and took her to the tribal leader and said, "I want to marry this woman." He said, "Well, according to Sharia law, you can buy her for a handful of dollars." I forget now what it was. It was 600 or some de minimis amount of money, bought this young girl. and took her to make her his wife. The dad finds out about it. He goes to the tribal leader and says, this gentleman took my daughter, and I want her back. And the Sharia law, tribal leader says, under Sharia law, you have no rights. And this woman, Habiba, is still forcibly married to this Al-Qaeda leader. Now, is that rare? It's not rare. 2,260 women, according to our research, were raped, sexually assaulted, or forced into marriage because of their Christian faith last year. So it's a significant rising issue, and we think it's because ISIS and Al-Qaeda are now seeing this as a strategic wedge with the Christian populations in the areas in which they work. We have tracked the recordings and the documentation of ISIS where they say, we'll give you, ISIS soldier, more money if you can kidnap, rape, take the wife of one of these local pastors, the child. And so they value the attack on Christian women above other Christians in the society, other women in the society. We understand that ISIS is hard on female populations everywhere, but this is a trend we really need to watch, and it's one that nobody's really talking about. When you think about it in terms of breaking it down to the daily level, 6 women a day are attacked in these very significant and brutal ways for their faith. Not 6 women a day are sexually assaulted, but are attacked because of their faith. They're sexually assaulted. Okay, that's the key element here that we want to draw out. And I would love to see more people talking about this, more people raising this up, and for us as the body of Christ, those of us who are people of faith, to struggle with how can we let our voice be heard on this. That we are going to, not only in our own communities, honor and value females and women, but we are not going to be silent. We are going to speak out and let people understand this is a significant issue. The next trend that we see is radical Islam, obviously. I think it's okay for us to talk about radical Islam as soon as I get on the media and we all get in the public sphere. People say, hey, you can't just paint Islam with a broad brush. And true enough, there are hundreds of millions of Islamic followers that aren't part of ISIS. But we have to be able, I think, to articulate that there is a population within Islam that has a clear political agenda to impose Muslim domination on cultures and governments. That's how I define this Islamic extremism. It's not everybody in Islam who might have some faint idea of what the Quran actually says. I'm talking about that population within it that has a clear political agenda, and it's growing. I don't think anybody should be sort of lulled into thinking that because ISIS no longer controls a physical caliphate within Iraq and Syria that somehow they're gone. They're not gone. We got feedback. I was getting feedback from our folks in Africa even 2.5 years ago that all the ISIS bomb folks were training people in the regions in Africa in which we were working. So they've been exporting their expertise and their targets and their priorities, Christian churches, Christian communities, Christian schools, to folks around the world since ISIS really took over the caliphate in Iraq and Syria 4 years ago. So now they have lots of money, but they don't have a capital. But ISIS doesn't need a capital. It's going to continue to be a clear threat to persecution of Christians, and I think we need to recognize it. They don't need a capital, they're not going away, and they have a radical and clear agenda. As Megan was very clearly saying today, the international communities are slow to recognize the religious liberty aspect of ISIS, that this was always their clear and stated goal to eliminate Christians, and yet they always saw it as tribal, or these are gangsters. I've heard it all. But when you talk to believers there in these territories, and I've talked to many of them, you'll know the deep impact, and we're going to see this as a trend. Okay, let me talk about some hot spots that would not be part of the trend. I touched on this a little bit, but India is one that I'm going to continue to bring up everywhere I go and everywhere I speak, because people are so asleep on this issue and we need to wake up to it. We have signed billion-dollar agreements in the last 12 months with India with no discussion that I'm aware of, and I'm in the State Department fairly regularly about what we're doing to discuss the religious freedom of believers there. Let me read this to you. This just came across my desk. I get little updates on folks every day. Here, this is a 66-year-old lady murdered by a Hindu extremist when she was praying in India. Her name is so long I can't even pronounce it, but I'm going to give it an effort and honor her. Chudadira Jupali Sudavamarira, 66-year-old Christian converted lady from the Boyapali village, Martur Prakasham district, was murdered by a Hindu extremist March 31st in 2018. The murderer was caught 2 days later. Today, he confessed to police that he had killed her because he was angry because she left Hindu gods and had adopted the Christian faith. He said that he had been waiting for a chance to kill her, and that day he got the right opportunity. As reported by local Christians on March 21st, at around 11:30, this woman went to her terrace to pray, which she did often, and as she was praying, the assaulter took a heavy stone and attacked her. She screamed loudly. The neighbors heard her and rushed to her house. They saw the assaulter running and jumped off the buildings. They chased him for a while, but they couldn't catch him. They immediately called the police. After more inquiry, the police confirmed that the assaulter was not a local resident. He had come recently to the village to carry out some construction work at the Hindu temple. He was caught later and confessed to the crime. Please pray for the family of the bereaved as well as local Christians who are traumatized by the event. And it goes on. That's a public. This is available for me to read to public. Some of them aren't. But India is a hotspot we need to watch in legal circles, in government circles, and I think there's a lot that can be done because India is concerned. They're not a rogue nation. They are concerned. They do argue with us whenever we release the World Watch List. They call senators and they protest and so forth, but the reality is very, very clear. Hundreds held without trial because of their Christian pastors. I went to India last year. Their pastors are arrested if they have church. They will be sometimes chained. I saw several of them chained to a wall in the local police station. These are very difficult conditions that these believers are going through in India, of all places. You go to Delhi or some of these folks, some of these major cities, you just wonder how that's possible, but they have a radical agenda. So India is going to be a hot spot in years to come, okay? Another hot spot is Africa. We see Africa as the #1 area for violence against Christians in the coming generation. You say, why is that? What about the Middle East? Well, first of all, there are more believers in Africa, just a larger population of them. And you have this division within Africa, the continent, where you have Sharia law states in the north, and you have larger Christian populations in the south. And you could just draw a line across, it's a band of persecution across the middle of the continent where there's extreme violence. And Nigeria is sort of the I guess you'd say, the prime example of this, because it itself is divided in half. Christians live in the south, Sharia states in the north, and you have massive violence there with Boko Haram, which is the Al-Qaeda ISIS affiliate there in the northern part of the country, but they're not the only ones. There's also some ancient herdsmen of the Fulani groups that are also extremist Muslims that attack Christians there. But you have massive losses of people. 2 years ago, I think there was almost 2,000 believers in Nigeria who were killed for their faith in the north of Nigeria. So it's a significant number. So you have a lot of Christians. You have this clash of civilization. And then guess what? You have very ineffectual government. So you don't have strong sense of amongst the population that the governments are going to protect them. You don't have strong police forces. You have lots of corruption. And as a fourth principle, you have a really young population. So you have generations that are coming up, all the corruption, a lot of anger. We're going to have a lot of violence in Africa. So it might be an area you want to watch or consider how you could play a role in your unique way, whatever that is, as a lawyer or an advocate. Be watching Africa. There's some very important happenings going on there. I'm going to Africa here again shortly. Tomorrow. We'll be heading off on a trip. So another one is Asia. Asia is a country, because of their strong blasphemy laws, and I had a statistic here that I think was quite interesting. More than half of Asia has half of the world's population. And it's because of their ineffectual laws. They don't prescribe to many of the international systems regarding religious freedom. It's okay, it's appropriate for Open Doors and others to say that half of the world population lacks an effective remedy when it comes to human rights abuses because of Asia and all the stuff that's going on there. So you have blasphemy laws in Pakistan, other countries which are very significant, which allow for a strong sense of vigilante justice within these countries. Megan talked about it much more eloquently than certainly I could. But the most notable case would be Asia Bibi. It's notable because she's been on death row in Pakistan for a long time. And I missed the first part. Did you talk about Asia Bibi in your speech at all? Okay. So you all know that idea. She's just talking, sharing her faith, arrested and put onto death row. It's not. That's just one. That's just one case. There are lots and lots and lots of them that never make it to prison because of the blasphemy that people bring against them, and they're just executed by mob violence. Okay, so watch Asia. That's an area of terrible importance. The other region that I'd point out is the Middle East. Obviously, because of Sharia law and many of the things that are going on in the Middle East, you just have an enormous amount of activity in the Middle East. It's a very dangerous place to be a follower of Jesus, but there are good things going on there as well. Obviously, in the midst of all of this, if you want to talk about the spiritual movements, and we do believe that there are areas of growth there amongst the moderate elements. You have one of the things I will say on the level of church involvement is that the ancient church there, we feel like in many places, is reviving because of the persecution. Iraq is a prime example. The pressure that has happened in Iraq has really shook up the historic church, and I think has the potential to revive them. They're still under tremendous pressure. In Syria, you have a historic church there as well that in every way is very much alive and well. And they were very complacent. When Andrew went and spoke to the believers in Syria about 5 years before the civil war broke out, he talked to them about persecution. Now, Syrians were always protected by the regime, by Assad and his father before him, because the regime is Alawite. That's a small percentage, maybe 14% of the population. So they cobbled together all these minorities, of which some were Christians. So Christians did very well in Syria. And when Andrew and some of the folks from Open Doors went into Syria and said, hey, persecution is happening in Iraq and whatever, and it's going to come to you, they said, what are you talking about? And I think that could happen to believers in America, by the way. But they said, what are you talking about? We have a very good deal here. The regime came under pressure. It was no longer politically expedient for them to defend Christians. And all of a sudden, they're caught in the crossfire between ISIS and the regime. But what has happened is the church is revived. And it is strong, and it's doing amazing things. And the Church of Jesus in Lebanon, which has every reason, the Lebanese people have every reason to dislike Syrians for political and for historical reasons. The church in Lebanon has reached out to Syrian believers and to Syrian Muslims who have come into the country, and it's caused a revival of sorts. It's not a tent meeting revival, but it's just good old-fashioned I love your neighbor stuff that has happened to me, so no worries. I've done that before. So Middle East is a place to always watch. It's still trying to help you. It's okay. It's okay. I forget where it was, but within the last 2 weeks that happened to me. So, okay, some issues, and then we're going to go to questions here in a moment. Issues and tactics, places that you could focus on in your law practice or in your advocacy. I think certainly the government, trying to do what Megan does, and just going into government and speaking within those circles. There's so much our government can do as American taxpayers, that we have deals with Saudi Arabia, we have deals with India. Many of the people on the World Watch List are not rogue agencies. They're not scofflaws to international law, or at least they don't say they are. And we can influence them by understanding these important business deals that are going on, by speaking into them, and by bringing religious liberty into the conversation. I think past administrations have had, more or less success in this, have said the right things, but not done a whole lot. This administration, particularly Vice President Pence, seems to really care about this and understand it. But we have to be honest that the deals with Saudi Arabia, the deals with India lately, I have not heard any discussion about that. Nobody at the State Department seems to confirm that religious liberty is part of that. But the State Department does have wonderful people working on this issue that I feel confident would care about this. But so far, government has taken this sort of at an ad hoc basis. They're just kind of doing a project over here, a project over there. It's not an all-government movement that's cohesively bringing together a push to encourage religious value. But we've got to start to make a connection for people, for governments around the world, that when you have religious liberty in your people, it's good for your economy, it's good for a lot of reasons, and I think there are ways we can prove that. You can look at the success that India has had. You can look at the success that other countries have had by having a pluralism. Indonesia, while it's the largest Muslim country in the world by population, has avoided many of the problems that the other Islamic countries have had, because they've had a more open, pluralistic point of view, allowing Christians to exist, although with limited rights. But it's benefited them, even the little bit that they've had. Now Indonesia are cracking down in ways I think are problematic, and they're going to see continued problems. But I think that I'm not the only one who could make this case, and maybe some could do it better. I think there are ways in which we can show governments that they can make a difference by opening up religious freedom for their folks. I think another tactic or activity that people could do if they chose to would be to defend the accused. There are so many cases around the world now of pastors. Andrew Brunson in Turkey, he's just a notable one because he's an American, but there are just hundreds and hundreds of these cases where people are arrested without cause because of their Christian faith, and we just need folks defending them. Public sentiment, pressure, social media is significant, but we need good lawyers. We need good lawyers on these cases, defending folks like Andrew Brunson. He is worked in Turkey for 20 years. He's no threat to the government. He's obviously being used in some kind of a hostage diplomacy where they're holding him hostage in order to get the leader of this cult or this movement that is apparently against the Turkish government. It's all political nonsense. We need good lawyers defending the accused. I think another issue would be just trying to understand and deal with Sharia law and its creeping effects on law in the West. I think would be an area of good focus for people who have an interest in the law. Okay. As I said at the beginning, I really feel like the persecution of Christians and religious liberty issues around that is the battlefield of this next generation. It's going to be pervasive. It's not just going to be one baker or two bakers. It's going to be every church dealing with tax law, dealing with zoning law, dealing with all of the various things that come up in order to pressure Christian organizations, schools, universities. It is going to happen. Christian churches are going to lose the tax benefit of nice land like this. Universities, the intolerance question is going to be ratcheted up. It is going to be the battlefield. And we need good people, lawyers, and individuals advocating. And I'm hoping that you will commit to making this as something that you would support. And just letting your voice be heard on this issue, I think would be a great thing. Before I take questions, I thought I'd read a few prayer requests that I got this week, if I could. Just to show you, and some of these are legal, but they just sort of spread out across the world. And this is sort of thing, like I said at the beginning, just gets me going, just gets me excited to wake up every day. And if I'm winning or losing or whatever, at least I know I'm in a good, valuable fight. 12 Eritreans arrested while visiting newlyweds. Eritrean authorities have arrested 12 Christians gathered at the home of a newlywed couple in the capital of Asmara on March 5th. 10 friends had gone to visit the newlyweds for a traditional coffee ceremony to welcome the new bride. It is suspected that spies in the neighborhood informed security officers of the meeting. They arrested all 12 and took them to Asmara's number 5 police station. On March 7th, authorities released 8 of the group after they produced valid IDs, travel IDs. You need permission to travel around Eritrea. The 4 remaining Christians, including the newlyweds, were moved to the Adi Abeto prison north of Asmara, and we understand that the couple has been split up. Please pray for God's comfort and encouragement to these newly arrested believers. Pray that they will not be overcome by hopelessness or fear, but experience God's sustaining grace in every way, in every situation they're facing. And pray that the government of Eritrea will have a change of heart and allow religious freedom for all. Are you all followers of Jesus in here? Okay. Here's a little note. The arrested couple is part of our team, the Open Doors team. So that's why particularly we're concerned about this, but we would be in every other way too. Here's another prayer request, Sharia law update. Earlier this year, this is in Brunei. The Sultan of Brunei has reshuffled. He's been going through a process. Are you all aware of this? Where he's bringing Sharia law into Brunei in a very significant way. The Sultan of Brunei has reshuffled his ministers and appointed new people into his cabinet. Security in the country has also been tightened. Furthermore, the Borneo Bulletin recently reported that the country has taken another step closer to implementation of Sharia law Penal Code 2013. The draft of the Criminal Procedures Code on Sharia has been approved by the Islamic Religious Council and consented by the Sultan. Apart from the CPC, a number of standard operating procedures have also been drafted to ensure all relevant parties are able to carry out proper investigative procedures, prosecutions, trials, and implementations of sentences. So it's coming. The first phase of the law, which came into force in 2014 on May 1st, covers general offenses such as disrespecting the month of Ramadan and propagating religions other than Islam, which are punishable by fines and imprisonment. Since then, the second phase to mete out harsher punishments for serious crimes, such as amputation of limbs for theft, have been delayed many times because they're unable to be finalized until now. We need to pray for the church. The church is still being complacent even as the laws are becoming tighter. They are not prepared for persecution and will live out their Christian witness only within its 4 walls. As long as they do that, they think they will be safe. But will they? This is from one of my staff members. Bangladesh, a woman deprived of a family inheritance for following Christ. Recently, we met with Morgina, she's 35, through the Anana Women's Discipleship Program. Her Muslim family tried to force her back to Islam, but she refused. Therefore, they've decided to cut off ties with her and deprive her of her inheritance rights to the property of her parents. It's a legal issue. This decision has upset Margina, as she says, I'm feeling sad that I couldn't see my mom anymore, but I'm still happy because the Lord's always with me. I'm confident I can face any storm or persecution for His name as He gives me strength. Praise God for her resilient faith in Christ. Pray for her husband and children as they support her to stand firm in the faith. That's not her real name, by the way. Here's one in the Middle East, Syria. Pray for Christians who had to flee the North Syria city of Afrin and the surrounding villages since Turkish troops and their allies have taken control of the city. According to the UN, over 100,000 inhabitants have fled the city and are now displaced, namely in the countryside north of Aleppo. Other sources speak of over 180,000 displaced persons. Most stay in camps. There are about 75,000 now in Taj Rifat. And among them are 300 Christians from Afrin, many Kurdish believers who've also fled and are staying at camps in 4 locations. The people have not returned yet. This week, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that people are not able to return to the city as they're stopped at checkpoints. As usual in complex war situations, there are many rumors that spread, for example, of Christians being forced to return to Islam by militant groups. Another rumor is the church building has been booby-trapped. Happily, we couldn't get these rumors confirmed, so they seem to be only rumors. Pray for those who are trying to help these people. Pray for Christians that they will experience in the midst of their hardship the presence and the comfort of the risen Lord. Okay, I mean, just stuff going on. I hope it will motivate you and stir you in some significant way. Okay? Questions? Yes, ma'am.
If we want to have more talk and to urge leaders, what government department has anything to do with persecuted Christians or committees within Congress?
Hey, what committees within Congress or departments deal with persecuted Christians? I think there are several. You obviously want to think about the State Department, which should have a cohesive plan on dealing with religious liberty, but often does not. In my experience, it has not. They do have folks within that. They have a ambassador for religious liberty, newly appointed Sam Brownback, who I think will do a great job. But the previous Secretary of State, Mr. Tillerson, moved that position down further in the org chart. We need the ambassador for religious liberty to answer directly to the State Department, but to the Secretary of State. But to answer your question, State Department, I think the USAID, the group that distributes aid, needs to have a plan conceptually on how they deal with groups around the world that have been persecuted religiously. We have an example in Iraq where USAID has, I think it's $75 million earmarked to help Christians in the Middle East, in Iraq and in the north of Iraq there. But that's never really happened before. This is the first time they've done that. Typically they're just distributing aid and it doesn't get distributed equally, so they go into Nigeria. Last year, Open Doors spent a lot of time trying to feed Christians in northern Nigeria because the UN aid and government aid was going to the camps run by Muslim groups, and they weren't allowing Christians in. Christians didn't feel safe to go in. So these Christian populations, large groups, aren't getting the help they need. So I think USAID is one that you have to work within. State Department, I would probably ask Megan to jump in there. I think certainly the White House, any of these groups need to be lobbied. I would say those would be the three. The three ones we concern ourselves with is what's happening in the White House and what's happening in the State Department and USAID. Yes?
Thank you for your talk. First of all, it was enlightening. I feel a little guilty, honestly. I do work with the State Department on a regular basis and Department of Justice and federal agencies on the issue of human trafficking.
Wonderful.
So, and I always try to bring in the Lord whenever I've spoken on Capitol Hill or, from the White House to every agency. But hearing what you're saying now, I feel like there must be more that I can do. How can I integrate what you were talking about and influence those people that I communicate with on a regular basis? How can I help tie that together? I know there's separate issues. They
Yeah.
have a separate ambassador for trafficking. I didn't even know they had an ambassador for religious belief.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful if we can begin to see the centrality of religious freedom in these countries. It touches on so many important things, but when you have a system that does not allow people to essentially decide for themselves what they believe, you have to ask yourself, how free is that society at all? So when you're talking with these folks, if you can make sure that you're advocating for religious freedom and begin to see the ties, as I'm talking, maybe you're starting to see the ties, but their ties are everywhere. You begin to see how affected crime rates are, how affected poverty rates are, to the fact that the people don't have the freedom of religion, that the governments are abusing their people and the human rights and these sorts of things. I think it's terribly important. But I also want to validate what you're doing, because I think that's terribly important, and thank you for what you do. Yes, Megan.
I have a question about, I'll give you an example. When I went to Sri Lanka and I met with an evangelical lawyers group, they said that the Catholic Church there was actually hurting them because they didn't want to lose people to the evangelical churches as well. In Russia, a bishop in the Catholic Church said something like, "Oh, these new laws don't affect us because we're not going to evangelize." In various countries, we see that the people who are being persecuted are the newer faiths that focus a lot on evangelism, like Pentecostal, Baptist, and so on. I'm wondering if you see a trend where there's sort of a divide between these historic faiths like Catholic Church, Anglican churches versus the new evangelicals. Are they sort of pitted against each other in some ways? Are they working together?
It's a great question. When we do our research, we measure the government pressures, family pressures, community pressures, and one of the ones we hardly ever talk about because it's sort of complicated, and it's intramural, okay, is religious persecution. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's Orthodox churches holding down younger evangelical movements or Catholic movements somehow, not wanting to support other evangelical movements, and whatever. The intramural problems go in every direction. It's not growing. It is a constant and significant problem. But it typically happens in greater extremes on countries farther down the world watch list. When people come under pressure from ISIS, when they come under pressure from extremism and this sort of thing, all of a sudden, the intramural sorts of things you're talking about fall away. For example, in Egypt, one of the significant drivers of persecution for a long time was Coptic churches reporting growing evangelical churches, and evangelical churches were not cooperating with Coptic churches, and Coptic churches could get Bibles, but evangelical churches couldn't because of the laws had been set up, and it was a big mess, and they did not like each other until President Morsi came into power after Mubarak fell, and the Muslim Brotherhood took over and began to persecute everybody equally. All of a sudden, Coptic believers are being killed right next to evangelical believers, and folks woke up and they realized we're in this together. Everybody's asked one question: will you deny Jesus or would you like to die? And these Coptic believers are dying for the name of Jesus right next to evangelical believers. And it opened the eyes of the Egyptian church. Not to say there aren't still problems, but what's happening in Russia, what's happening in some of these other places, yes, it's true, it happens, and it's a problem. But I think it's a problem based on religion. I mean, my encouragement to people is that is a religious problem. That is a Christian problem, but it's not a Jesus problem. We have to come back to the spiritual movement at this and talk about Jesus, the centrality of Jesus around the faith. But we can't support religious persecution intramural religious persecution amongst Christian groups, and it happens regularly. It certainly does. It's shameful. I'm glad that CNN or Fox doesn't ask me about that, because I'd much rather talk about it amongst ourselves first. We got to figure this out. The Coptic Pope in Egypt is I think a dynamic follower of Jesus, and lots of these other groups are having the revivals within them. I think that's certainly helping to bring folks together, and high levels of persecution are breaking it down, breaking every dogma. In Iraq, you had lots of established historic churches, and when ISIS came in, what did you hear them talk about? Their icons, the churches. I'm a history person. I was sad to see those go, but the essence of the movement is the work of Jesus on the cross. And so those folks had to do a gut check on their orthodoxy, what was important. Likewise, Muslims have had to do a gut check, and a lot of our churches are while under pressure, they have people who have come from the Muslim faith and whose orthodoxy has been broken by this extremism. And so it's shaking things up in a way. It's one of the silver linings. Maybe time for one more question? Or?
One or two more.
Yes.
You mentioned the north-south divide in Africa.
Yes.
Pretty straightforward. But in India, I wonder if there's anything similar to that. Especially, I know the multiple language groups and so forth. And are there areas of India or even states within India that would disagree with the statement to be Indian?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. I keep calling him President. Prime Minister Modi is very popular, and he also has a strong economic agenda. So what you will see is it's a giant country, but there's 65 million Christians within it, and I think you have somewhere around 33, 35 states that are managed by the BJP party. So within those 35 states, you have vigilante justice that happens, attacks on churches. Some churches are torn apart brick by mobs, very quickly. And no charges are ever pressed. When you see these pastors and Christians being arrested and held in prison for weeks and months at a time without any sort of legal representation, it's always in one of these states that is run by the government. The parties, the BJP party that answers back to Prime Minister Modi. So it's not everywhere, and I think there's still opportunity for the people, the population to speak out. But right now, the Prime Minister is very popular, and he tries to modulate his stance. But you can go places in India and see the posters and touting that, by I think it's 2020 or 2025, they want to eliminate all Christians. And it's, like I said, on the news, it's everywhere. This is having to do with Compassion International being pushed out last year because they're a Christian organization. They will almost certainly, if it keeps going, push out World Vision. They attack Open Doors and other groups like us. We've had last year we had 12 people arrested from our group. So it's happening in lots of places. Yes.
You mentioned that international pressure on places like Eritrea and so on has been ineffective, and almost the whole human rights movement is kind of classified, I forget who said it, but characterized the human rights movement as the mobilization of shame. In other words, shaming countries into behaving, into cooperating. But in light of the fact that it seems to be ineffective or just not working with these countries who just, have ignored that, is there a way to kind of turn that into, I guess I'm wondering if there's some kind of positive or affirmative measures that we can take, for instance, by getting behind the unification that you were just talking about among Christian groups, Orthodox, Evangelical, whatever. Is there something we can do to give them a boost?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. No, I get you. If they're rogue regimes and they seem to ignore international law, is that a reason to totally back off? Right? Isn't there something we can do? Well, let me tell you what our theory in practice is that we feel called since the beginning, since the time of Brother Andrew, to stand with and advocate with the church in these regions. Because I think fundamentally what we believe is if we can strengthen the church, it can grow within these environments. Sometimes I will have people erroneously come up to me and say, "What's the problem with persecution? Every time there's persecution, the church grows." Actually, no, that's not true. Sometimes it grows and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it dies under persecution. So our answer within Eritrea, North Korea, and these rogue regimes is to help the church grow. And because it is carrying the light of the world. And when the church is growing and strong, like happened over a long period of time in China, eventually they can't ignore it. They try to kill it, they try to snuff it out, whatever, and eventually they've got to make an accommodation for it. There are more Christians in China than there are members of the Communist Party, we believe. Not everybody believes that. But so you have to ask yourself, for example, in North Korea, there's rounding off 25 million people. It is the rural neighbor to the south. When I go to talk to Chinese Christians, a lot of times they're very sort of, what are you worried about North Korea for exactly? Forget, because they are in it. They're in it. It'd be like me calling you to go talk to people in Tijuana or something. It's close, it's accessible, but you're not aware of it. Okay. If we had a portion of the followers in Jesus, just a fraction of them, who decided one weekend to walk across the border and to take a train into North Korea, we'd swamp that entire country with Jesus people. There are 100 million followers of Jesus in China. There's 25 million people entirely in North Korea. So in my view, with rogue regimes, you can run yourself in circles and we have limited resources. The thing to do if you're a follower of Jesus is to support the church, advocate for it, make sure that they're first survive and then thrive. That's why we put so much effort into making sure that they're resourced and they're not alone. Thank you for your time. I don't want to take up too much more of it, but I appreciate it, Andrew, the opportunity to speak. Please, if you have any questions about what we're doing, Open Doors has all kinds of stuff online, prayer list, projects you can support, particular cases that need advocacy. We often have writing campaigns to senators and congressmen to try to mobilize support where we think it's helpful, like in India. That's why I talk so much about it, because I think there's a lot we can do in India. But so appreciate your support and help. Thank you.